If you want to use still images in your video, then you may want to consider animating them. And by animating, we mean moving them around on screen. It gives more of a visual flow to your video when you cut between real video clips and still images. But you can also use animation to draw attention of your viewer towards a particular area of the image. So let's take a look at how we can do that in HitFilm Express. So I've got a still image here. Let's bring it onto the timeline. And immediately you'll see it's kind of zoomed in. And the reason for that is because the original still image is quite high resolution. If we look down here and multiply these two numbers together, it comes out at between 5 and 6 megapixels in size, whereas any given frame of HD video is only around 2 megapixels. If we think back to our project settings, we put in 1920 by 1080 pixels, which is standard for HD video, and that comes out at about 2 megapixels per frame. What that means is that when we put in a high resolution still image, HitFilm Express will actually read the 2 megapixels from the middle of the image. We can tell it to turn those 6 or 5 megapixels back down to 2 and show us more of the image by just heading over to controls, hitting transform, and then using the scale attribute to reduce the scale. And this way we can see more of the image. If you try and reduce the scale even more, you'll notice that you'll eventually see the edges of the image and you'll get these black bars here. And the reason for that is that while we don't have any at the top and bottom, we do have them at the sides. It's because the aspect ratio of the original still image is different from the aspect ratio of HD video. So we just need to make sure that we don't see the edges of the image there. The amount that you'll be able to reduce this percentage will depend on the resolution of the original photo. If it's a very high resolution image, you'll be able to reduce this number even further before you see the edges of the image. What's important to note though is that you do choose a still image that has a higher resolution than 2 megapixels, because this will allow us to animate the image on screen without seeing the edges of the image, and it also allows us to animate without losing any resolution within the image. So how do we actually get this thing moving over time? Well, first of all, we just need to make sure this is all at its default settings. So I'm just going to return this to 100%. What we need to do is right click the image and make composite shot. Press OK. And now what we've done is we've taken a closer look at the clip within the editing timeline. If we click on the editor tab, we can return to the master timeline. But what we're doing is we've taken a closer look and we're going to make all the changes we need and all the animations within here. You'll notice that the transform controls under the controls tab have disappeared. Now we can find them under the layers window. So we just open this little menu here, go to transform, and there we've got our scale attribute. But now we've got this circle, which means that we can start to keyframe the scale attribute, and keyframes are the fundamental part of animation. So with the playhead at the beginning of the clip, we can turn on keyframing. You can see we've already made one keyframe there, that blue diamond. And now let's move the playhead to the point at which we want our change in scale to end. Now move it all the way to the end of the clip. And now let's reduce the scale. If I was to press the blue circle now, that just turns keyframing off and that removes any animation that we've applied. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm just going to change the scale here. And we decided we could go as far as 70%, so why not go all the way? And now when we play between those two keyframes, we've got this slow zoom out. Once you've got your keyframes, you can do several things with them. You can change their timing. So the closer the keyframes are, the quicker the clip has to move in order to get to that scale. So now we've got a zoom that's twice as fast, but for the remainder of the clip we've got nothing going on. Another thing you can do is you can swap keyframes around. So now we've got the reverse effect. We've got to zoom in. one more thing that you need to know about keyframes is that if you have your playhead anywhere that's not on one of the keyframes you've already made, and you change an attribute that has keyframing turned on, you're going to make a new keyframe. And what that will do is it'll tell the image it'll have to get to a certain point of whatever the attribute is on that new keyframe, and then continue to whatever the attribute is on your final keyframe. So let's watch this. Yeah, so it zooms in and then zooms out. This kind of goes a bit crazy, so I'm going to get rid of that. You can edit a keyframe by making sure that your playhead is on it, and now we can change the value of that individual keyframe. So we've just changed it from 70 to 82. So now we've got a much slower zoom in, and that will also affect the speed of your animation, is the difference between the two values set between the two different keyframes. Okay, so now we know that we can animate a property like scale. We can actually animate any number of these properties at one time. So we start with a zoom in. Let's swap that round again. So we've got a zoom out. So we start close. And let's have it start at the top right hand corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe the position. So I've made a keyframe here. So at the moment we're telling it start in this position, but I want it to start somewhere else. So I'm going to edit that keyframe by keeping the playhead on it. And now I'm just going to move the position until we're looking at the top right hand corner of the frame. Now I'm going to move the playhead, and what I want it to do, as you can see, because we've only got one keyframe and we're looking at the top right corner and it's zoomed out, we can see the edges of the image here. So for my second keyframe, I'm just going to return the image to its default setting. And now when we play through, we've got this zoom out and we've got a diagonal pan across the image. And that's a pretty cool way just to animate your images, give them more interest, and perhaps draw your audience's attention towards something on the screen. While we're in the compositor here, I just want to briefly show you the extent to which you can actually manipulate your footage or your photos in HitFilm. If we go to the effects panel, let's add something like a blur. Let's bring it to this clip here. And I'm going to turn off all this keyframing that we've done. So we've just got a stationary clip again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate that blur. And if we use this attribute here called radius, we can change the amount of blur that we have. And this is a really cool way to maybe reveal something if there's a mystery or you want to answer a question in your video. You can, or maybe it's just another way to do a transition from one shot to the other. So if we bring our playhead to the beginning of the clip, let's blur it quite substantially so we can no longer see what it is. Now let's hit the keyframing tool, make a keyframe with that amount of blur. And now we just want to move the playhead a little bit ahead. And now let's just get rid of the blur completely, take this all the way down to 0. And now we've animated that blur, so let's play through. We've got this reveal from like a blurry start. So we can do all sorts of things once we know this. So if we go back to opacity, we can also put the opacity down to 0 and animate that to fade from black. So now we've got this kind of blurry fade from black. So really, you willed your oyster once you've got into keyframing. You can definitely get yourself into a pickle, but it's worth experimenting to get some really cool visual effects going on. Anyway, that's how you animate in HitFilm Express. Good luck, and I will see you next week.